The doctor didn't lower his voice. He didn't need to. The room was quiet enough to hear the air system clicking behind the wall. He said I had days. Not weeks, days. I nodded once, like someone receiving directions. My hands were folded on the blanket. I remember noticing how clean my nails looked. Clear polish, no chips. Then I saw my husband smile. Not wide. Not cruel in the obvious way people expect. It was a small, private smile that came and went, like a calculation finishing itself. He stood near the door, arms crossed, already half-turned toward the hallway. That was the moment I understood something important. Grief doesn't look like relief, and relief doesn't arrive that fast. The doctor kept talking comfort measures, hospice coordination, paperwork that would make things easier. I heard the words, but I was watching Noah, my younger husband, the man who used to call me steady, dependable, his anchor. He didn't come to my side. He didn't touch my arm. He asked one question, very calmly. How soon do we need to sign? If you were in my situation, you might think shock explains everything. It doesn't. Shock is loud. This was quiet. This was organized. In the hallway, his sister Claire was already there. She hadn't been in the room during the diagnosis, but somehow she knew exactly when to arrive. She spoke to Noah in the low, efficient tone people use when discussing logistics. We'll need to move quickly, she said, before things get complicated. I was still visible from the bed. They didn't lower their voices. That was the humiliation, not shouting, not accusations, just the assumption that I was already gone, that my role had ended. A nurse came in to adjust my IV. Her name badge said Hannah Lewis. She had the posture of someone who notices everything and reacts to very little. She didn't look at Noah. She looked at me. Pain level? She asked. Manageable, I said. She nodded. Professional. Neutral. But she didn't leave right away. She checked the monitor, straightened a stack of forms on the counter, waited until the doctor stepped out. Noah followed the doctor. Claire stayed behind, flipping through her phone like she owned the room. That house will be a lot for him to handle alone, she said, not looking up. We should talk about selling. Quickly. I turned my head slightly toward Hannah. My voice stayed even, almost conversational. Could you do me a favor? I asked. She leaned closer, just enough. I need you to note that I'm alert, I said, fully oriented, and I want copies of everything, every chart entry, every consent. Today, Hannah didn't react right away. Then she asked, Is there anything else? Yes, I said. Please don't release any documents without my signature. Not to my husband, not to anyone. Claire looked up then. Her expression flickered, surprise first, then annoyance. That's unnecessary, she said. We're family. End quote. Hannah didn't answer her. She looked at me. I lowered my voice further. And if anyone says I'm confused, I added, I want that documented too. Word for word. This was the sentence I whispered next. The one that changed the temperature of the room. Do that, I said, and I'll take responsibility for the rest. Hannah met my eyes. There was no drama in her face, just recognition. All right, she said. I'll make sure it's done correctly. If you wanted advice now. She closed the chart without writing anything. Not yet. Claire left the room to make a call. I heard her say my name like it was already past tense. When Noah came back in, his smile was gone. He looked at Hannah, then at me. You tired yourself out, he said gently. You should rest. I looked back at him, calm, measured. I'm not tired, I said. I'm paying attention. Silence sat between us. Not awkward, not emotional, just complete. You wouldn't believe how much power lives in moments like that when you stop explaining yourself and other people realize they've been seen. I didn't know yet how wrong the diagnosis was. I didn't know how much had already been decided without me. But lying there, with the monitor ticking steadily beside me, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. I wasn't done, and I wasn't disappearing quietly. If you stay for stories that unfold quietly, where strength doesn't shout, and truth arrives with patience, you might want to like this video and subscribe. It helps these stories keep finding the people who need them. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment with the city you're listening from. I read them more than you think. This is a story worth hearing all the way through. Now let me take you back. Back to a time when I still believed my life was stable, when silence felt safer than questions, and I hadn't yet realized how close betrayal was standing. 3 years earlier, my life looked reasonable from the outside. That was the word people used. Reasonable marriage, reasonable age gap, reasonable compromises. I was 46 when I married Noah. He was 33. Old enough to know himself, young enough to still be figuring things out. I had a stable career, a paid-off house, habits that came from building a life alone and learning to trust my own judgment. He had charm, momentum, and a talent for making other people feel interesting. At first, the difference between us felt complementary. I handled planning. He handled energy. I paid attention to details. He kept things light. Then light slowly became hands-off. It started small. Noah offered to manage our shared calendar because my schedule was heavier. He suggested consolidating accounts to simplify things. When I hesitated, he didn't argue. He just waited. Silence has a way of sounding reasonable when it's patient. I noticed the shift when my name stopped appearing on things. The mortgage statements still came to the house, but he opened them. Medical bills went to his email. He started attending appointments with me, sitting close, answering questions before I finished my sentences. He's just being supportive, people said. And he was. Technically, the power imbalance didn't announce itself, it settled in. His family helped. Claire had opinions about everything: how we furnished the house, which doctors were more aggressive, which friends of mine were a bad influence. She said these things kindly, always with a smile that implied concern. "You've been through a lot," she would tell me. "It's okay to let someone else steer for a while. I'm safe, Dad." I didn't argue because arguing would have required energy I didn't have. Around that time, the fatigue started. Not dramatic, just persistent. I'd come home from work and sit longer before standing up again. I forgot small things. Names, appointments. It made Noah's involvement feel helpful instead of invasive. When I was diagnosed the first time early, manageable, treatable, Noah became efficient overnight. He learned the language. He asked questions. He carried a folder. I let him. Silence, in my case, wasn't submission. It was triage. I believed if I conserved energy in one area, I could survive another. I believed harmony was a form of strength. I was wrong about that. Over the next few years, I noticed how often decisions were framed as favors. I already told them, yes, it saves you the trouble. I handled the paperwork so you wouldn't have to stress. They said it was fine if I signed. It is line. Each sentence carried the same message. You're relieved, aren't you? And most of the time, I was. That's the uncomfortable truth people don't like to hear. Control often works because it's convenient. My friends drifted, not abruptly. Invitations came less often. When they did, Noah always seemed to have a conflicting plan, or I was too tired, or it didn't feel worth explaining. I didn't feel trapped. I felt managed. When I tried to reassert small preferences, keeping my own doctor, delaying a financial change, Noah didn't push back directly. He'd look disappointed, quietly wounded, as if I'd failed some unspoken agreement. "I just want what's best for you," he'd say. That sentence ended most conversations. By the time my health worsened again, the structure was already in place. He was the point of contact, the emergency number, the decision-maker in waiting. I saw it clearly only once, during a routine appointment. The nurse asked me a question about my symptoms. Noah answered. The nurse looked at me, politely confused. I corrected him, calmly. He smiled and squeezed my hand under the table. The gesture looked affectionate. It felt like a reminder. On the drive home, he said, "You don't have to fight me." I hadn't realized I was. Looking back, I understand why I stayed quiet. Not because I was afraid, because everything still functioned. The house ran. The bills were paid. The marriage appeared intact. There was no single act of cruelty I could point to, just a slow relocation of authority, and I allowed it because I thought love meant endurance, and endurance meant not rocking the structure holding you up. The mistake wasn't trusting him. The mistake was confusing silence with stability. Still, even then, something in me was intact, observing, recording, waiting. I didn't know when I would need that clarity. I only knew I hadn't lost it. The trigger wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no slammed doors. It was a form. A single-page hospital document handed to me with a pen clipped to the top, the kind meant to be signed quickly, without discussion. The nurse, someone I hadn't met before, pointed to a highlighted line and said, "We just need confirmation here." I read it slowly. Too slowly for Noah's comfort. The line named him as my sole medical decision-maker in the event of incapacity. I already had a directive on file. I knew that. I'd signed it years earlier, long before Noah. It named me first, always me, unless proven otherwise. "This replaces the previous one," the nurse added helpfully. "Your husband requested the update." I looked up. Noah didn't meet my eyes. "That's not correct," I said. Not sharply, just clearly. He smiled the way he did when he wanted to lower the temperature. "It's just procedural. They recommended it." Who recommended it wasn't specified. It didn't need to be. The sentence did its job, made resistance sound unnecessary. I didn't sign. The nurse hesitated. "I can come back later." "Please do," I said, and handed the pen back. After she left, Noah exhaled, not angrily, tiredly, as if I had added weight to an already heavy day. "You don't trust me," he said. "That wasn't a question." "I trust accuracy," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked. Something flickered there, annoyance, maybe calculation. It passed quickly. Later that afternoon, Claire arrived with coffee and a tone that suggested she was there to help manage expectations. "There's been some concern," she said, settling into the chair like it belonged to her, "about how overwhelmed you've been." I waited. "The doctors think stress might be affecting your clarity," she continued. "Noah's just trying to protect you." That was the moment I recognized the pattern for what it was. This wasn't about care. It was about narrative. Over the next few days, small things stacked up. Appointments rescheduled without asking me. Test results discussed in the hallway before I heard them. A social worker introduced to me, as if I were already failing to cope. Each incident alone was plausible. Together, they formed a shape. The misunderstanding came during a family meeting, arranged for support. I hadn't requested it. I hadn't declined it either. A physician summarized my condition gravely, but vaguely. He used words like limited options and time-sensitive decisions. Noah nodded at the appropriate intervals. Claire took notes. When the doctor asked if I had questions, Noah answered first. "We're focused on comfort," he said. "Quality of life." I felt the pressure then. Not from him, exactly. From the room. From the shared assumption that this direction had already been agreed upon. "I have a question," I said. The doctor turned to me, surprised but attentive. "Which tests are these conclusions based on?" I asked. "Specifically." There was a pause, a quick glance at the file. "We're still waiting on some confirmations," he said carefully. "Then I'd like to wait too," I replied, "before we reassign authority or revise directives." Noah's jaw tightened. Just slightly. After the meeting, he spoke to me in the corridor, his voice low and controlled. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I didn't respond right away. I was thinking about something Claire had said earlier about stress affecting clarity. The phrase had been repeated twice, too deliberately. That night, I asked for copies of my records. The clerk told me they'd already been sent. "To whom?" I asked. She checked the system. "Your husband." I nodded, calm, observant. "Please note," I said, "that I'm requesting full access moving forward, directly." She complied. No drama, just a few keystrokes. When the files arrived, I read them like documents, not diagnoses, dates, language, attribution, and there it was. A note entered after an appointment I'd attended, fully alert, stating I appeared confused and deferred decisions to spouse. It wasn't true. It wasn't signed by a physician I recognized. It was small. But it was enough. That was the real trigger, not the illness, not the prognosis. It was the realization that someone had begun laying groundwork. If you were in my situation, you might have confronted them, demanded explanations, forced a scene. I didn't. I printed the records. I highlighted inconsistencies. I requested a patient advocate. I asked for an independent review. I stopped assuming good faith. And in doing so, I felt something shift. Not anger. Not fear. Alignment. For the first time in a long while, my actions matched my awareness. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be accidental. The change didn't come from a surge of courage. It came from precision. Once I stopped trying to be agreeable, everything slowed down in a useful way. Conversations took longer, decisions paused. People waited for my response instead of assuming it. I asked for a new oncologist. Not dramatically, just a request, submitted in writing. I cited my right to a second opinion. I attached dates. I copied the patient advocate. The hospital complied. Noah didn't object outright. He adjusted his tone instead, became softer, more attentive. He brought soup I didn't ask for, sat closer to the bed, spoke about us in the plural again. "We're in this together," he said. I noticed he stopped using my name. The new doctor, Dr. Patel, reviewed my scans without commentary at first. She asked questions Noah couldn't answer. She asked me to describe symptoms in my own words. She listened without looking at him. When she finished, she closed the file. "There's progression," she said. "But not what you were told. Not days." I absorbed that quietly. "How long?" I asked. "We need more data," she replied. "But this isn't an end-stage conversation." I thanked her. I didn't look at Noah. That was the moment I stopped negotiating emotionally. Relief didn't rush in. Neither did vindication. What arrived was clarity, the understanding that decisions had been rushed because someone benefited from urgency. After that, I changed my approach. I stopped explaining myself. When Noah asked why I needed another review, I said, "Accuracy matters." When Claire suggested I was exhausting myself with questions, I said, "I'm managing my affairs." When the social worker asked if I felt supported at home, I said, "I'm reassessing support." Short sentences, neutral tone, no openings. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply stops asking permission. I requested a full audit of my medical file. I asked for authorship verification on every note referencing my capacity. I filed a formal correction request for the inaccurate entry I'd found earlier. The hospital responded with process. Process is slow, but it leaves a trail. At the same time, I contacted my attorney. Not to threaten, to document. We updated my advance directive. We reaffirmed my medical proxy me. We added language restricting reassignment without my written consent and independent evaluation. Copies were sent to the hospital, my primary physician, and placed on file. I didn't inform Noah beforehand. I told him after. "I've handled it," I said when he asked why the advocate called. "Everything's in order." His smile froze. "Just for a second, you didn't need to do that alone," he said. "I wasn't alone," I replied. I was precise. There was no argument after that, just a subtle shift. He began to check with me before answering questions, began to wait. Claire, on the other hand, grew restless. She cornered me one afternoon while Noah stepped out to take a call. "You're creating unnecessary tension," she said. "People are concerned." "Who?" I asked. She listed names: administrators, family members, all third parties. "I'm not responsible for their comfort," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "You're making this difficult for Noah." I looked at her carefully. "Then perhaps," I said, "he should stop making decisions on my behalf. Head out." She laughed once, short, dismissive. "You don't see it," she said. "You're not thinking clearly." I didn't respond. I reached for my water instead. Took a sip. Let the silence stretch. Then I said, "That statement has liability attached to it." Her laughter stopped. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean," I replied, "that any claim about my capacity should be documented, substantiated, and professionally attributed. Otherwise, it's defamatory." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I simply named the structure. She left soon after. From that point on, the pressure shifted. Not heavier, more careful. People began to ask instead of assume, to confirm instead of proceed, and internally, something settled. I no longer felt the need to prove I was competent. I knew I was. The turning point wasn't about confrontation. It was about withdrawal from emotional bargaining, from shared narratives that didn't serve me. I transferred my trust from people to processes, and in doing so, I felt the balance tilt, quietly, irreversibly. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It assembled itself. Documents first, then timing, then motive. Once the audit request was active, the hospital began sending notices, neutral language, standardized templates. Each one confirmed receipt, review, pending action. I saved everything. Dates matter. So do headers. My attorney requested transaction records from our joint accounts. Not accusatory, just verification. We cited routine financial review related to medical planning. Within 48 hours, irregularities surfaced. Transfers I didn't authorize. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Always timed within days of major appointments. Payments labeled vaguely, consultation, advance, miscellaneous. The account holder listed was Noah. When I asked him about it, I didn't accuse. I asked for clarification. He said it was for preparations. He said he didn't want to burden me with details. He said everything was reversible. I listened. I wrote it down. At the same time, the hospital's compliance office contacted me. They wanted to review the note that questioned my capacity. The author, it turned out, was a resident who hadn't examined me directly. The entry had been added after a conversation with my husband. That detail mattered. I requested a formal correction. I attached my independent evaluation. I included a statement affirming my alertness, signed by 2 attending physicians. The correction was approved. The record changed. Once that happened, the tone shifted again. A family meeting was scheduled. This time, at my request, my attorney attended by phone. A patient advocate was present. The physician who delivered the original prognosis sat across from me, composed but cautious. Noah sat beside me. Claire chose a chair near the door. The meeting began with a summary, then questions. I asked the physician to explain the discrepancy between initial projections and subsequent findings. He did, carefully. He acknowledged uncertainty. He acknowledged haste. Then I asked the compliance officer to read the corrected entry aloud. She did. The words confused and incapacitated were gone. What replaced them was factual. Patient alert. Oriented. Demonstrates understanding of treatment options. Requests direct involvement in all decisions. Noah didn't speak. Then my attorney asked about financial authority. I hadn't authorized transfers related to end-of-life planning. I hadn't signed consent for asset reallocation. The documentation Noah believed sufficient was, in fact, provisional. The room went quiet. Claire spoke then. She tried to frame it as misunderstanding. Stress, fear, love expressed clumsily. I let her finish. Then I said, "Intent doesn't override evidence. Botter. This is not her." I asked the compliance officer to confirm that any decisions made under the assumption of my incapacity were now void. She confirmed. I asked the bank representative on speaker to confirm that the account in question had been temporarily frozen pending review. He confirmed. Noah finally looked at me. "You did this behind my back," he said. I met his eyes. Calm. "I did this in front of records," I replied. That was the collapse. Not dramatic, just definitive. The authority he'd been exercising depended on a version of me that no longer existed on paper, and without that version, nothing held. The meeting ended without resolution because there was nothing left to resolve. Outside the room, Noah tried to speak to me privately. I declined. "Please direct any further questions to my attorney," I said. It wasn't punishment. It was structure. Later that day, the hospital issued a formal acknowledgement. My medical authority was restored without condition. Access restrictions were updated. Noah was no longer listed as primary contact. The next notice came from the bank. A review was underway. Temporary safeguards were in place. No accusations, just procedures. That evening, I sat alone in my room and read through the paperwork again, slowly, line by line. What struck me wasn't satisfaction, it was relief. Not because I'd won something, but because reality had finally been aligned. If you're ever in a situation like this, you learn something quickly. Truth doesn't need volume. It needs context and documentation. The counterattack wasn't loud. It didn't require confrontation or exposure. It required patience. And once everything was laid out, the betrayal didn't need interpretation. It spoke for itself. Once the facts were on record, people wanted calm. That was the word they used. Calm, as if the issue had been tone rather than truth. As if what mattered now was smoothing edges instead of correcting harm. The hospital administrator asked if we could reset expectations. The social worker suggested mediation. Claire left a voicemail saying the family needed to move forward together. Noah said very little. When he did, it was careful. "We don't have to involve lawyers," he said. "This doesn't need to become adversarial." I listened. I didn't respond right away. "I'm not interested in escalation," I said finally. "I'm interested in boundaries." That ended the conversation. Refusal doesn't have to sound like anger. Sometimes it sounds like completion. I declined mediation. I declined joint meetings. I declined to revise my directive again for harmony. Every decision was communicated in writing, every response copied to the appropriate party. My attorney sent a notice clarifying that any future representation of my capacity without evaluation would carry liability. The language was neutral. The effect was immediate. The family shifted tactics. They reframed, suggested this was all miscommunication. That stress had led everyone to act imperfectly. That forgiveness would be healthy. I didn't argue the narrative. I simply removed myself from it. "I'm not discussing interpretations," I said. "Only documented actions." That line became a kind of filter. Conversations either adjusted or ended. Noah tried once more, late in the evening, when the room was quiet and the day staff had gone. "I was trying to protect you," he said. "You know that." I looked at him for a long moment. Long enough for him to feel the pause. "Protection doesn't require concealment," I said. "And it doesn't benefit one person exclusively." He had no answer for that. The hospital finalized the updates. New access protocols were in place. All communications came to me directly. My medical team addressed me first. The shift was subtle, but absolute. I noticed how people recalibrate when authority is clear. Voices lower, language sharpens, assumptions disappear. That clarity extended to my personal affairs. The bank maintained the freeze pending review. Independent counsel handled the process. I didn't push for penalties. I let the system do what it does when presented with timelines and records. Noah's access was reduced to his own accounts. Joint expenses required dual authorization. He called it punitive. I called it accurate. Refusal, I learned, is not cruelty. It's precision applied consistently. By the end of the week, the requests slowed. The suggestions stopped. The invitations to talk things through dried up. What remained was silence, not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that follows resolution. I spent that time reviewing my plans, updating beneficiaries, revising contingencies, not out of fear, but out of respect for the life I still had. And for the first time in years, I wasn't managing anyone else's emotions, I was managing facts. The consequence of that choice was simple. Fewer conversations, clearer days, and no need to compromise my reality to preserve someone else's comfort. Leaving didn't require drama, it required timing. Once my treatment plan stabilized and the hospital cleared the transfer, I chose a smaller facility closer to the coast. Different team. Different routines. A place where no one knew the old story. I informed Noah after the arrangements were confirmed. "I'm relocating," I said. My care will continue there. He asked when. He asked why. He asked if this was necessary. I answered only the first question. The morning I left, he arrived early. He brought a coat I already owned, folded over his arm like an offering. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. I took the coat. Not the offer. "I'm not alone," I replied. "I'm just not with you." The words landed quietly. He didn't argue. He sat instead, watching the room empty itself of my things. Claire didn't come. She sent a message later about giving space. I didn't respond. The transfer was efficient. Paperwork signed, records forwarded, no lingering goodbyes. As the doors closed behind the transport team, I felt the release, not relief exactly, but distance. Physical distance has a way of clarifying emotional truth. Noah called that evening. His voice was unsteady. "I can change," he said. "We can reset." I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I said, "Change doesn't require an audience." He asked if I was ending the marriage. "I'm ending proximity," I said. "The rest will follow its process." That was enough. Over the next weeks, his messages slowed. First apologies, then questions, then silence. I didn't block him. I didn't need to. Boundaries are effective when they're maintained, not announced. At the new facility, my days were quieter. Mornings open to water instead of traffic. The staff addressed me by name, asked before touching, waited for answers. I learned how much energy returns when you're not being negotiated. One afternoon, Noah appeared without notice. He stood at the entrance, uncertain, as if the threshold itself were a decision. "I just wanted to see you," he said. I met him in the common area. Public, neutral. "You've seen me," I said. He looked smaller there, not diminished, unprotected. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. "I know," I replied. "Intent isn't the same as outcome." He nodded, once. That was the closest he came to understanding. When he left, he didn't ask to come back. The departure wasn't about victory. There was no satisfaction in watching someone realize they'd lost access. It was about choosing a life that didn't require constant defense. I walked back to my room alone, sat by the window, watched the light shift across the water. Leaving isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the moment you stop explaining and start living somewhere else. Karma didn't arrive with spectacle. It moved through systems. The bank review concluded without commentary. Funds transferred without authorization were returned. Account structures were revised permanently. No announcements, just corrected balances. The hospital completed its internal review. Policies were reinforced. Training was updated. I received a letter acknowledging the inaccuracies in my record and the steps taken to prevent recurrence. No apology was requested. None was necessary. Noah faced consequences that didn't look like punishment. His credibility thinned. Conversations around him became more careful. Institutions stopped assuming his authority. Claire's influence faded faster. People who speak confidently without documentation eventually exhaust their welcome. What mattered most wasn't what happened to them, but what no longer happened to me. No one spoke over me. No one answered for me. No one made decisions in my absence. My health improved in ways charts don't capture. Not cured, stabilized, manageable. The body responds differently when it's not bracing against misalignment. I adjusted to a smaller life. Fewer rooms, fewer conversations, more clarity. Two outcomes stood out. First, my autonomy was no longer theoretical. It was operational, recorded, respected. Second, my sense of self returned without effort. I didn't have to reclaim it. I had simply stopped giving it away. I heard through a mutual contact that Noah had moved, changed jobs, explained the separation in careful language. He wasn't vilified, he wasn't celebrated, he was adjusted for. That seemed appropriate. There was no moment where I felt triumphant, no scene where justice announced itself. Just a steady recalibration, like a scale finding balance. If you've ever waited for karma to perform, you might miss it when it arrives. It rarely makes noise. It looks like access revoked, assumptions corrected, silence where manipulation once lived. I spent my afternoons reading by the window. I learned the staff schedules. I learned my own rhythms again. And in that quiet, I noticed something unexpected. I wasn't hardened. I hadn't lost trust in people. I'd gained trust in process, in my ability to respond with clarity instead of reaction. That, to me, felt like the real consequence. I didn't return to my old life. I didn't want to. The life I built afterward was smaller in footprint, wider in breadth. I moved into a modest place near the water once treatment stabilized enough for outpatient care. 1 bedroom, clean lines, nothing that needed managing beyond what I chose. People assume recovery looks like reversal. It doesn't. It looks like alignment. I reconnected with a few friends. Not many. Just the ones who didn't need an explanation for the gap. We met for coffee, walks, quiet meals where no one tried to fix anything. I told them the truth without drama. They listened without questions. That was enough. My days developed a rhythm. Mornings were for appointments or reading. Afternoons for walking, when the lights softened and the path along the water emptied out. Evenings stayed intentionally open. I learned to leave space without filling it. The marriage ended through attorneys, clean, procedural, no public statements, no drawn-out negotiations. The settlement reflected records, not emotion. I signed the final documents with a steady hand. Noah didn't contest it. Once, months later, I saw him in a grocery store. He looked healthier than the last time I'd seen him. Less guarded, more contained. We noticed each other at the same moment. He hesitated. I didn't. "Hello," I said. "Hello," he replied. There was nothing else to say. No apologies, no revisiting. We stood for a few seconds in the space where history used to be loud. Then we moved in opposite directions. I didn't feel sadness afterward, or satisfaction, just completion. My health remains something I manage, not something that manages me. Some days are harder than others, but the difference now is agency. I make decisions with full information. I ask questions. I expect answers. And I trust myself to notice when something feels off. If I could name what changed most, it wouldn't be my circumstances. It would be my boundaries. They're no longer defensive. They're structural. I don't explain them. I don't negotiate them. I don't apologize for them. They hold. Sometimes people ask if I'm angry about what happened. I tell them no. Anger would suggest I'm still tied to the outcome. What I feel instead is clarity. And gratitude for the moment I paid attention, for the systems that responded when presented with facts, for the quiet strength that didn't leave me even when I doubted it. Life now is quieter, healthier, honest, and that's enough. If this story stayed with you, you're welcome to like the video or subscribe only if you want more stories told this way. And if you feel inclined, leave a comment with the city you're listening from.